So you got your new camera and you brought it home and you're looking at all the dials and you want to move off auto mode. You want to go ahead and go to manual. You want to change the settings and use your camera like a pro. In my previous video, I went over ISO and what it does to affect your images. You can check that video right up here on that card I'll put in the video here. If you haven't seen it already, check it out. Next thing I'm going to cover is aperture. Your aperture, or your f-stop, changes the opening in your lens, allowing more or less light in, and it does a couple of things to your pictures. So we're going to go over that real quick. This is your crash course. So what is aperture? What is an f-stop? What do these numbers mean? Guess what? Doesn't matter. We're not going to get into the math. We're not going to get into the reasons that it's called an f-stop. We're not going to get into the reasons why the numbers are what they are. I'm just going to tell you what it does and give you a couple of examples so that you understand. Okay, so what is an aperture on your lens? An aperture is the opening in your lens allowing light through. Apertures go from wide to narrow, okay? A lower aperture number is a bigger hole. A larger aperture number is a smaller hole. I know that's a little confusing when you first hear it. When I first learned it, I was very confused as well. Here's how I've remembered it the best though. Think of the aperture and the lens and the hole and how it opens and closes. Think of it like your eyes. When it's really bright and sunny outside, your pupils get smaller to not allow as much light into your eyes so you could see better. When it's really dark, or you're in a basement or a really dark room, or it's nighttime outside, your pupils get a lot larger, allowing more light in so you could see better. Aperture works the same way. If you want to allow more light into your camera, into your sensor, you make the aperture larger by using a lower f-stop number. If you want the image to be darker, you use a higher aperture number, which makes a smaller hole, allowing less light in. Now, when you are using a larger aperture, which is the smaller number again, a larger aperture, a wide aperture like f2.8 or f1.8 or 1.4, those really small numbers mean that it's a very large hole in your lens, a large opening. If you're using those lower numbers and more light is coming into the lens, one thing that you're going to get is a shallower depth of field. You've probably seen this effect on most portraits or lifestyle shots or outdoor shots. That blurred background really gives your photo a professional look, and it's probably the look that most people are after when they first get a DSLR camera. They want that separation of person to background. You could do this with software, even on your cell phone these days using portrait mode, but there is a distinct difference between doing it with an actual lens. Anyone could tell the difference on when a photo has been taken with a cell phone using portrait mode or with a actual DSLR or a mirrorless camera with a wide aperture. So why wouldn't you use a wide aperture all the time? If it's allowing more light in and it gives you more options and it gives you that nice blurry effect, why wouldn't you use it all the time? Why would anyone never use a larger aperture number and a smaller overall aperture, a smaller opening? Well, the reason is if you're using a larger aperture number, which is a smaller hole allowing less light in, you have a much wider depth of field. Now this could be as dramatic as going up to f16 or in the f30s and having a very tiny pinhole. That way, if you're shooting a landscape, you have all of this stuff inside of your focus point. It's all in your depth of field. Everything will be in focus and all along. Nothing will be blurred out unless you really want to and you bring that number down. Also, it's good if you're shooting portraits and say you're at f1.8, that's a very shallow depth of field. If it's a family and there's a couple of people there and some people aren't directly lined up, one is a little forward from the other one, they're going to be out of focus while the other person is in focus. So you might want to bring your aperture to f3.5 or f4 just to make sure that depth of field is a little more extended to keep everyone in focus on the camera, especially in shots where you have people standing in front of each other and in back of each other and you want to keep everyone in focus. That's one reason you would raise your aperture up and close that hole down a little bit to get a little more better of a depth of field. Not only that, if you're shooting something extremely bright, where even at, say your aperture is wide open and you're shooting something extremely bright like fire or some bright lights and you want to really get the detail and you don't want to blow out the highlights, you would bring your aperture down if you want to maintain the same shutter speed and the same ISO. Your only other way to let less light in would be your aperture. That's another reason you would close that hole up a little bit. It all depends on what you're going to be shooting. If you're going to be shooting wildlife like I do and portraits like I do, then you're going to be wanting to use a shallower depth of field for the most part, just to separate the background from the subject. Like in a lot of these pictures that are flying right here, most of my lenses there are wide open. Wide open meaning it is the lowest possible aperture number possible, the widest the lens can possibly go. That is how I shoot most of my wildlife photos. I want as much light as possible. I want as much contrast to the background as possible. Now, if you're going to be shooting things like landscapes, you are really going to want a higher aperture number and a smaller hole to get more of the detail across more of what you are shooting, depending on exactly what you're shooting in those landscapes. So I hope this gave you a good understanding of what aperture is and how to actually use it. You need to use it in conjunction with your shutter speed and with your ISO. And in my next video, I'm going to go over shutter speed and how to use it properly. And I'm going to make one more video after that that's going to bring all three of these basics together and make sure that you understand how to work all three of these basic settings to make some amazing photographs. Again, just as my last video, I want to thank GrizzTuff for sending me some of this great gear. It was really nice of them to send it out to me. They are not sponsoring this video in any way, but I reached out to them on Instagram, said I like their stuff, and they were kind enough to give me this lovely hat and this shirt. If you guys like this kind of stuff, you're looking for some nice gear, go ahead and check them out. Their link is going to be in the description. It's at GrizzTuff. Also, the link to my Instagram if you want to see some of my photographs that have all of my settings on them with my ISO, my shutter speed, and my aperture setting, as well as my lenses and cameras. Check out my Instagram at dom.iwc. Every one of my pictures has all that information posted. That way you guys can learn at your own pace and ask questions. Otherwise, thanks very much for stopping by. I hope this helped, and I'll see you on the next one.